Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our hosts an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun.
Okay, well, we are really lucky today to be joined by Peter Warmka. Peter, thank you very much for joining us today on CSI Chat.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this.
You're welcome. Absolutely. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on Peter before we get into it, because Peter's got a very unique background that I'm just going to touch on here. But here's a little bit of background on Peter. Peter spent he's with the CIA. He's a former senior intelligence officer with the CIA, and spent over 20 years in the national intelligence, dealing with national intelligence and security issues. He is a certified protection professional, certified fraud examiner, and a licensed private investigator in the state of Florida. Peter is also the founder of the Counterintelligence Institute, which you can find online. The mission of the Counterintelligence Institute is to help institutions protect their sensitive information and personal data records against security breach attempts, which is pretty much would be applicable to all entities out there, whether they're a corporation or a not-for-profit or whatever they may be. It's a very broad mission. Again, companies and not-for-profits and other entities are being hacked on a regular basis. Clearly, that's something that's pretty important. And he's also the author of two terrific books. I have read both of them myself, and I would highly recommend that people take a read of them. The first book was Confessions of a CIA Spy, which talks a lot about human hacking and how you can build relationships with other humans and how some people can take advantage of those relationships and use it to extract information from you. And a second book called Why Are You Messing With Me, which is a book, typically it was geared towards seniors, but as I had told Peter leading into this conversation, this book is really applicable for everybody. And it's really how to safeguard your assets. You know, you've worked your lifetime or a portion of your lifetime to build up assets like, cash or stock or a house or whatever it may be. And there's individuals out there who are looking to take that from you and to take it illegally from you. And Peter outlines many of these different schemes and approaches and how this can be done in his book, and how to pretty much, build in some measures to protect yourself so that you're not victim to a scam. Because unfortunately, the amount of money lost due to these scams is, on an annual basis is probably in the billions. And the reality is a lot of these scams probably aren't reported because people are probably too embarrassed to tell the world that or tell authorities that they've been defrauded. So again, I would highly recommend that people take a read of both of those books. But Peter, let's start with where you spent a big part of your professional career within the CIA, and maybe let's just back up a little bit before that. But where did you grow up, and kind of what did you do before you joined the CIA?
Oh, I grew up in central Wisconsin, actually.
Oh, wow.
I was born on a farm. Well, literally not born on the farm. I was born in a hospital in the nearest town to the farm. But farming community. My father thought that I was going to grow up to be a farmer, and we all kind of accepted that would be the fate. But I had interest in going into the high school seminary, actually. And one of my older brothers did the same thing for a period of time. So I went at the age of 14, I left home and went into a high school seminary in Mount Calvary, Wisconsin, and run by the Capuchins, which is a division of the Franciscans, and thinking about being a priest. But at that age, you're thinking about a lot of different things, and that's one thing you're exploring. And because of I was really, really good in learning languages, especially Spanish, and didn't hurt that actually, a lot of the other languages were taught by bearded Capuchins. The Spanish teacher was a really attractive lady from Mexico. So I excelled in Spanish, and I also was really interested in the missions. The Capuchins had missions in Nicaragua, on the east coast of Nicaragua. So I was approached by them and say, hey, we want to kind of do an exploratory trip and take down a few students to visit the missions. And we really wanted to invite you first because of, your Spanish and your interest in the missions. And so I went. This was in 1977. We left Milwaukee in a big green Ford station wagon, drove from Milwaukee all the way down to Managua, Nicaragua, and of course we passed through Mexico,
Wow. Oh,
El Salvador,
oh,
Guatemala,
jeez.
and Honduras. My first time out of the state of Wisconsin. I mean, we were driving through parts of Tennessee. I was, through hillbilly country, and I was like, wow, this is really like a cultural experience for me, right? Let alone going through all these other places. Anyway, so then from Managua, there are no
How long of a
roads.
drive is that, Peter? How long is the drive? Like, how long of a drive is that?
Well, we made a few stops along the way, but I mean, it probably took us about 3 days.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
and then there were no roads between the West Coast and the East Coast. I don't think there's still are, at least back then they weren't. And so we had to fly. We got on a plane and flew from the West Coast to the East Coast. And then we visited about 5 different missions during that time. I really liked it. And so I decided I was going to go back 2 years later, kind of like on my own, not
Oh,
with a
wow.
group, but on my own. And I wanted to work in Puerto Cabezas. And actually, Puerto Cabezas was if you know anything about the Bay of Pigs invasion, that was one of the sites from which the Bay of Pigs invasion was launched.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was, really looking forward to this trip, but things were starting to get a little bit dicey because there was a civil war going on. But when you're, when you're 19 years old, you think you're invincible, and I'm going to go. And I didn't, my parents didn't really know what was going on there at the time. They weren't following it, and I was going to go. And then, believe it or not, literally about 3 weeks after I got there, all hell broke loose, and there were no more airplanes. I mean, I was over in Puerto Cabezas, but the airplanes which were owned by in Somoza, the airline was called Lanica, and all these planes were flown out of the country. And with no airplanes, there was no mail because all the mail was carried by the airplanes. There was no telephone communication anymore. Basically, I lost total communication with anybody back home in Wisconsin. My parents had no idea what's going on. I was fine. I was having a good time. It was to me really a very interesting experience for somebody, in as a young adult going through something like that, the Civil War, and sort of the Capuchins. They had ham radio, so they were communicating through all of Nicaragua to their other missions, and you'd find, people wanted to find out what happened to their relatives. Fortunately, that person's fine, or unfortunately, that person, was killed, whatever. But
Wow.
at the end of that summer, my plans were to go back to the university in Wisconsin. I left my passport. Unfortunately, I left my passport in Managua because it was so hard to get back now. And I had to get back. I had to take a banana boat from Puerto Cabezas to a town called Bluefields, and then from there a river boat from Bluefields to the city of Rama. Then I had to take a bus. It took me like 2 days to get from one side of the country to the other, and all these, And I finally got to Managua, and I still remember I couldn't get to the Capuchin house that night, and I stayed at this really small hotel. My room was no larger than the size of a cot, basically. And all night long, you hear this machine gun fire, pop, 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 because there were still out, pockets of Somosistas, the government soldiers that were still there trying to hold on. And eventually, the Sandinistas won entirely. And I got to the Capuchins, and I got my passport, and then I found out I needed an exit visa. I had to go to the Sandinistas and request an exit visa. And then, when I went there, they took my passport, and they kept on saying, "Mañana, come back tomorrow," right? I was going like for 2 weeks. And finally, I got the help of a Catholic nun, and she went in there and she gave these guys. She said, "This guy's a seminarian. He's trying to help your people, and now this is how you repay him. He needs to get back to the university." So within like 24 hours, they gave me my passport, and then I went back up to go to the university. So that was kind of like how I got really interested in a farm boy in getting interested in Latin America. And I decided I want to work in Latin America, but how am I going to do that? What do I study? Right. I took a little bit of economics. I took some business. I took Spanish literature. I took a mixture of everything. And fortunately, during that undergraduate, one of my teachers said, there is this program out in Thunderbird. I don't know if you've heard of it, in Glendale, Arizona, American Graduate School of International Management. They had one specific degree. It was like an international MBA. And she recommended that school to me. I went to it. And then when I finished, it was in 1983. It was a severe depression. I still remember they had a pub on campus. The pub was giving away a pitcher of beer for every 11 rejection letters that you would turn into them.
Wow.
I mean, it was bad. I had a few interviews, but nothing materialized. And then I decided to drive to Miami because I thought, let me try to get a job in the banking industry because to me that would be a stepping stone to working in Latin America. I got a job for a bank, Banque Sud-Ameris, which had headquarters in Paris, but offices, banks throughout all Latin America. And I started working with them, and they promised me that I would be able to move on to Latin America. That didn't happen. After 4 years, I'm getting itchy elbows. I start to interview with other banks, and then I saw this ad in the. With hindsight, now we call this a blind ad, an ad in the Wall Street Journal that said it was a group of European investors was looking for full or part-time consultants that could help them in their expansion into Latin America. The candidates would have to had lived for an extensive period of time or traveled to Latin America, with speak preferred speaking Spanish or Portuguese, and send in your resume. So I sent in my resume because I said, well, what might this lead to, right? I sent in my resume, and then about a month later, I get this letter from them saying, we're really impressed with your resume, and we would like to forward it to a client we have in the U.S. government. I had no interest in working for the U.S. government at all. Government did not interest me. And so I kind of like left the letter underneath my night table. I was supposed to sign it to give them authorization, right? Within 21 days. I didn't. 2 or 3 months later, my wife said, whatever happened to that letter? And I said, well, it's there. I never sent it in. It's so hokey. She said, send it in. Okay. Make her happy, right? Send it in. And then like a couple weeks later, I coming back. These are the days before cell phones. I'm working downtown Brickell, and I live in north part of a suburb of Miami. I get home, and my wife said, somebody from Washington, D.C. called you. Washington, D.C. I said, well, who? And they said they wouldn't tell me who, but they're going to call you back at 6. At 6 o'clock sharp, this is, landline, 6 o'clock sharp, get this phone call, and the guy, he identifies himself as representing the CIA. You got it, this all goes back to that letter you sent in, and we would like to chat with you. You got a few minutes. Few minutes ended up being like an hour and 20 minutes. Pretty much a one-way conversation. They would say, well, there's opportunities overseas, opportunities in Latin America, but they were asking me a lot of questions about me, pretty much to find out whether or not there was anything in my background that would cause a problem or preclude me from getting a security clearance, which, I understand. So there were a lot of things about lifestyle, whether you had a criminal record, if you stole, if you've taken drugs, and your sexual orientation. Back then, if you were anything other than straight, you wouldn't get hired because there was concern about blackmail. They won't discriminate on these type of things today, but back then that was an issue.
Wow.
I remember that was a question on a polygraph, a polygraph question too about your sexual orientation, because he wanted to make sure you are. You said you were that in fact you were. So he said, if you're interested to formally apply, I'll send you out a packet. And so they send me out by FedEx a envelope filled with documents, a lot of documents. Filled all those things in. About a month later, I get this call at work saying, could you come up for an interview? Okay. So they made they make all the arrangements, and I go and I check into the hotel. And the next morning, I get the knock on the door, like at 8:30 in the morning. This gentleman comes in and identifies himself as being a representative of the CIA. He said, before we can interview you or address any questions you might have or tell you anything, you need to pass a polygraph test. And incidentally, 2 floors down, we have a polygrapher waiting for you. Go down to 209, whatever it was. So I'm like, gosh, I'm walking down 209. I'm a bit nervous. And then I knock on the door, and it opens. And behind the door is this big guy. He could have been a linebacker for a football team. He's a big guy. And behind him, I saw this chair in the middle of the room with these straps and wires hanging on them. And he said, we can't force you to take this, but, if you want to continue with this process, you must take this exam. I said, well, okay. Strap me in. Asked me about 4 different questions. I can't really go into those questions, but went on for about 40 minutes. And he said, I guess we're done here. And I said, well, how did I do? And he said, he's just all serious and said, well, they'll tell you. Okay, go back up to my room, and a few minutes later, the other gentleman knocks on the door and says, congratulations, you passed the test. Now we can tell you about the program. I can't go into details about the program, but there was a special program. They were interested in me to work under an undercover program. And they said, if not everybody can do this type of work. If you apply for it and for some reason it doesn't work out, there's still other opportunities with the CIA. But let me know, is this something that would interest you? And I said, definitely yes. And so he said, okay, now we'll begin the interview process. We'll have you and your wife come back for a whole week. And they did. A month or so later, they set us up in a hotel suite, and from Monday through Friday, from 9 a.m. to about 5 p.m., it's a revolving door of people, cast of characters that came in and told us about their experiences, working with the CIA, and they were just asking all kinds of questions. And I'm sure there were.
And Peter, are they asking questions of your wife as well during this process? Like, is your
Yeah.
wife this is like a dual interview that you're up for the
It
job,
is
but
more
they're
questions about
interviewing both
me.
you guys?
Yeah, we're both there because they're also kind of assessing her, right? And they have us put, they have us sitting on the couch, and there's a couple of chairs there where they're sitting, and in the background there's the TV, and they want us to turn on the TV for sound masking, right? So that no one can be eavesdropping on this. Oh, so we had that on, and we're sitting on the couch and answering the questions, and I still remember, this is through my wife is from El Salvador, the country El Salvador. She was already naturalized U.S. citizen, which made this whole process easier. But one of the last people that interviewed us, playing like a good cop, bad cop, and he was saying, what if we hired you and we put you in El Salvador? And this is during a time when there was there's a lot of civil unrest going on, and he said, what if we had this bridge, hooked up with these explosives, and you were the one that had the charge here, and we were, all of a sudden there was these Salvadorians coming across the bridge, and we told you, you have to blow that up, blow the bridge up, blow it up right now. Could you do it? And I said, I don't know. I'll be honest with you, I just don't know. What are the circumstances? And I started asking questions. He said, there's no more information. I say, well, I can't tell you. Maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. I don't know. But it was just like really weird, surreal. In any case, so we go, we're going back, we go back home, and they said, well, they'll contact us. And I get contacted, and they say, can you come back up? Just you, not your wife. Okay. So I come back up. I'm in this hotel room, and this is like the movies, There's like 2 single beds. And that's it. There's no desk, there's no chairs. And 3 men come in. And we're all sitting on the edge of these beds, and kind of have this. And one guy is a psychologist, one guy is a psychiatrist, and one guy is sort of like this liaison, And he said, people love you. They love you, and they think you'd be great for this job. However, there's some serious concerns about your wife. And I'm like, what? What did they know about my wife that I don't know? Is she working for the Rush? Or, I was just like, God, so weird. And he said, well, when people were asking questions during the interview, you seemed very engaged, but she seemed like she was just kind of like staring out, beyond. And I said, well, you had to have, you had the TV on, and she was listening to everything, because I know we had conversations about this. She was listening to everything, and just kind of like, she had CNN on. It's kind of like watching the images of CNN. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And then they said, well, there's also been some concern about whether or not she could handle living overseas. I said, she's from El Salvador. She grew up during, this 10-year conflict when there was like fighting on the streets, dead bodies on the streets. There was, power outages every single night. There was martial law. I mean, I said, listen, if she's not capable of living overseas, I mean, she's more capable than I am. Okay. Rest assured. And so they said, okay, at 10 o'clock, no, I'm sorry. Hey, we're going to have a murder board later today, and call us back, pay for them at 2 o'clock, and we'll tell you the answer. So I'm like really nervous. I go to the movie theaters just to burn time. At 2 o'clock, I put in the quarters, made the call. Congratulations. And this is October. And they said, you can start the class that's going to start in January. I said, great. I'm going to, have to prepare giving my notice to my employer, sell my house, and all these preparations. And I said, also, my wife and I are planning to go to El Salvador for the holidays, right? To visit family for Christmas and New Year's. Then there was a bit of a silent pause. And they said, well, if you leave the country before you start in January, we will have to reinitiate the polygraph and the security investigation again. So I said, okay, And I go and I tell my wife, hey, I got in. And as soon as I said that, I didn't even mention the fact that we couldn't go to El Salvador yet. She started to cry. I said, why? I thought you'd be so happy. these were not tears of happiness. These were kind of like, she was like really it's just, I never thought they were going to hire you. She was so curious, the whole process, never thought that they would hire me. And they did. So I made a long story short, long story longer, but that's kind of like the process of how I actually got in. And you mentioned it's been over 20 years, 23 years actually, and 20 years was overseas. I was overseas for those 20 years. I
Wow.
lived and traveled over to 56 countries during that time.
And
I
what was your
actually,
what was your major objective? The
uh,
CIA, one of the things that surprised me is the CIA is really an information gathering organization. It is it is the goal of the CIA is to collect information effectively.
yes.
When you were deployed overseas, were you deployed kind of in the financial sector? Is that kind of where your area of focus is? What just generally kind of what was your area of expertise?
Oh, my area. Okay, first of all, as far as my role, my within the CIA as an information collector, a human term. I mean, there's different ways that we can collect intelligence, right? From SIGINT, I mean, a lot of different ways that intelligence is collected. But the most important and the most difficult intelligence sometimes to collect is what are the plans and intentions in people's heads, leadership. What are people planning to do that maybe is not available anywhere else? And so it's actually being able to spot, assess, develop, and recruit human sources that have access to that information. So I was kind of like being on the tip of the spear. CIA is huge as far as thousands and thousands of employees, but there's, the number of people that are actually out there collecting this human intelligence is very small. There's a lot of, administrative support and analysts and all this stuff back in Langley. But I was one of those individuals in the field that was spotting, assessing, developing, recruiting, and handling sources to obtain that intelligence to send it back to the analysts back in Langley. So and so during that period of time, you say, like, what was my area of specialization as far as financial sector? I did it all, and that's kind
Wow.
of like what I really, really, really enjoyed during my career is that I was consistently challenged, and sometimes I challenged myself to learn about different types of interests, industries. Whether it was the energy sector or the finance sector, or concern, or even getting involved in like money laundering, or getting involved in military sales or mining industry. I mean, got involved in pretty much anything that we had collection requirements. I had to make sure that I found some way to learn as much as I could about that industry, whether it was to sort of like backstop the cover I was using as being someone who was versed in that type of industry, or to gain access to individuals who maybe were working in that industry. Because if you don't sound like you know anything about it, people are not going to, not going to, doors are not going to be open for you at all. So I pretty much did the whole gamut.
Did your wife go with you, Peter? Did she travel? Did she go with you overseas?
Yes, she did. And it's basically for most of my career, she was the only individual that knew that I was with CIA, other
I
than
see.
people, inside Langley. She was the only person. My children didn't even know until they were maybe about 16, 17 years old when I decided to tell them. But some people decide not to tell their children. For whatever reason, maybe they think the children will take it badly or whatever. But I thought I could trust my children, and I thought there's people in Langley that know I work for the CIA. Why can't my own children know that? I mean, they should know that. So,
What was your day job what was your kind of cover? Like when your kids would see you leave for the day and come back home, or your friends, like what was your day job? Was it just like you were a banker or whatever? Just like some
well, I mean,
typical
during
cover
part of my
job?
career, as I mentioned, I did work undercover, and so a variety of different sort of business situations. And there was time I was working out of the embassy. Also later in my career, so when my children saw me leave, they just thought I was working for some commercial entity, and I would be traveling a lot actually. So, and I didn't really tell them very much about my work, and they never really asked me very many questions. It was just funny though. It was really funny because it got to that point where usually when we went back every few years for like physicals and all these things, we would go to Chicago, we'd go to Miami, and we wouldn't go to Washington. But this one particular year, they wanted us to go to Washington. And they also wanted to have our children's meet with a family psychologist. And I think, oh, they're going to be like, why are we in Washington meeting with so I decided to tell the two eldest ones. And my youngest one was a little bit too young, I thought. And so my wife took her to another room, and I told my children, and I'm telling them, this is why we're really here in Washington, D.C. right now. And I'll tell them, remember when this happened? This is why it happened, kind of like going back and forth. And this is who I really work for. And my daughter was, yeah, Dad, right. She was like, she knows I like to joke around a lot. So she was saying, Dad, come on, get serious. You're being so, I don't know, silly. And my son was just quiet, and his eyes were getting wider and wider and wider. And all of a sudden he said, wow, it makes sense to me now. It all makes sense to me, because my friends were saying, your dad is just a little bit different. A lot of the dads, they're having company picnics and they're, get-togethers and all this. Your dad is never doing that, and he's always traveling. He's gone so much of the time. He must be a money launderer or a drug trafficker. My son was, I think so. But he was like, he was in his mind trying to ration out, what was my dad, why is my dad a little bit different? And so they both thought it was, finally, my daughter said, wow, they both thought it was really cool, And then my youngest daughter, it wasn't until like the tail end of one of the last places I was in my career was in Brazil. And at that point I was actually identified to foreign liaison that I was working for CIA. I was actually running the office. So I was declared to the service there that I was with the CIA. And so I don't remember, we have had a number of directors. One of them was Director Hayden, who was actually the director of NSA before. And he had come down to visit us in Brazil. And so I spent several days with him. And that's just like about 6 months before I came back to the CIA, and there was Family Day. And so you can take your family in and visit some parts of Langley. And so I decided to tell my daughter, hey, you want to see where I work? And she's thinking State Department. She says, yeah, okay. And then we're driving into, Langley, and it says Bush Center of Intelligence. And I said, you realize where you are? And she said, Bush Center for Intelligence? CIA? What is that? So, yeah. And between the time that we parked our car and walked to the main building, my wife and I were going back and forth about, remember when this, kind of like, this is why we, now you can understand why all these things have happened. And she was kind of like blown away. And we went directly to the 7th floor where the director's office is. And it was like maybe a couple people there in line, and we joined the line, and, shook his hand and his wife's hand. And I said, Director, remember, we got together in Brazil, and this is my youngest daughter. And today she finally found out where I work. He grabbed her hand, the warm handshake, and he looked in it, and with a smile in his eye, a twinkle in his eye, young lady, welcome to our family. It was so awesome.
Wow. Yeah, that's a cool
awesome.
story. Yeah. So that's a great story on how you joined the CIA. Holy jeez, Peter. Give us some perspective now on on kind of what you did in terms of building relationships with people, because the building relationships with people is not just a CIA thing. That's in everybody. If you're going to be successful at your job, has to build relationships with people, and to get information from those people. Give us some perspective on human nature, on how those relationships are typically built.
Mhm. Well, I mean, we would identify, first of all, individuals who we want to target, right? Depending on where they worked and maybe what position they had, that might give us access. And then we had to find a way to actually meet them. Sometimes it might just be a cold, you kind of like call it trolling, where you're going to different events and seeing who you might run into, right? Or you're direct targeting them. You find a way. I know this person's going to be there, or maybe I just do a cold call to this person and develop some kind of pretext to get together. Especially if this has something to do with maybe business, it makes it a little bit easier than just say, if you're saying you're from the embassy and trying to meet with people, it's a little bit more difficult. But in any case, you meet with them the first time, and you're really trying during that first meeting to build, at least get a hook into them for a follow-on. Because if you can't get that follow-on meeting with them, you're not going to really go anywhere. Because what's really important, as you mentioned, is developing that relationship. And it takes a while to develop that relationship where, person's got to see why it's in their personal interest to meet with you. It might be, well, I like hanging out with this American, and we're going out to play golf, or, and we have some some common things of interest that kind of get a little bit away from the professional reason why we maybe got together the first time, and we move into more of a social relationship. And we will have a number of meetings, and we try to do this at least once a month, maybe twice a month, every other week, ideally, to establish that sort of rapport, that sort of trust that goes in. And during this period of time, we're trying to size up that individual. We're trying to assess them about, first of all, their access. What kind of access do they have to what we believe they have, what they should have for making it an interest, and what kind of access might we have to them? Because sometimes they have great access to what we want, but they're so busy. It's so hard to get to get them out of the office. And if you can't have access to them, you're not going to go anywhere, because this part, as you mentioned, building up that relationship. So in the process of meeting with them, I like to meet everybody to really get a well-rounded idea of who this person is. I like to meet them early on, once in their office, so I can see, what does their office look like, physically. What's the size of the office? Is it an office that's really nice and clean, or is it cluttered? What's on the walls? Are there diplomas? Are there awards? Are there pictures? Is there artwork of their kids? How are they interacting with people in the office? Maybe with colleagues or with junior staff. Are they very polite? Are they treated with respect? Are they a bit arrogant with their staff? Then I'd like to at some point, meet them in their house, their residence. That gives me an idea of their social economic status. I can also get a feel for what their hobbies, their interests are. But what I see on the walls, I get to maybe meet if they're married, meet their spouse, maybe meet their children. I can learn a lot from that. But then I want to shift away. I don't want to go to their house anymore or go to their office. I want to go to some neutral location where it's just the two of us. We're hanging out, we're enjoying it. And this is where the person can lift their hair down. That's when they can complain and comment about things that are going on at home, where they can comment about things that are going on in the office, right? And that's where I really get to know them well. And that's where they can really build up that trust, to the point of, and I'm not exaggerating here, where some of these individuals, they say, and I know for a fact, that we become, in some instances, one of their best friends that they've ever had in their life. Because they would even tell us that, you have, and just imagine that. Sometimes to me, that's like mind blowing, but it actually is that case, that they build up that trust and they tell us everything. And we get to learn then about their motivations and their vulnerabilities. And that's kind of like within what we leverage when we want to pitch them, because there's different ways that intelligence services might get a source. There's two different types of assets we could maybe try to recruit. One might be a support asset, right? That might be able to facilitate things for us if we wanted to rent vehicles or get telephones that are non-attributable to the U.S. government, or maybe they get a safe house that we maybe use for meetings. Those are called support assets. But by and far, the largest type of assets that we will recruit are sources, ones that provide us with the intelligence. And for us to recruit them, then we have to know that pretty much we're certain that they're going to accept that recruitment approach. And some of our adversaries, what they'll do is they'll maybe blackmail, try to use coercion to get somebody to cooperate with them. I can't say that it's ever not happened, but I've never seen it in my organization. I never used it. It's always, the approach is a win-win. I know what I can offer them that's going to be something that they're going to really like to get or to have, if it's one of their needs, or maybe more than one of their needs, and in return for something that they can give to me that I need, right? So it's kind of a win-win for both of us. And so when we do the recruitment pitch, we know with almost certainty that they're going to accept it. And there's always that possibility. We were always a little bit anxious. What if they don't? Because does that mean that they're going to think badly of us? They're not going to want to have a relationship with us, or worse, they might report it, to their office or to the government, and then we could run into a serious problem for ourselves, right? But I'll tell you, out of everybody that I pitched, and I pitched quite a few people, not one single one of them turned me down.
Wow.
Only two individuals told me, because a lot of times the pitch comes down to usually money, right? And it's not necessarily just the money, it's maybe what money can do for them. Maybe it's setting away money for surgery for one of a family member that's very costly they got to do outside the country. Maybe it's some money to help put their kids through private schools or university or what have you. It could be a lot of different reasons, but usually money is one of the things that we can offer. And there was two people that said, right, no, 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 no. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And he said, in both cases, we are friends.
Wow.
We have no problem continuing to meet and give you all these things that we've been talking about. I don't want anything in return. No, no, no,
Wow.
no. I don't want any money. No, we'll continue to help you with anything you want. We'll give you anything you want. You can imagine. So for that to happen, that's based on really that building that trust, building that relationship, and probably getting back to that more question though, how do you build that? It's showing genuine interest in them and listening to them, right? And being empathetic to them. I tried to portray myself as a very likable person, and warm handshake, warm smile, and asking about their family, and maybe find out that one of their kids is having a birthday, buying that little red race car and giving it to them. Hey, this is for your son. These little things that that
Yeah.
really make a difference in how we can
So
get to know them.
So let's turn that then and say, okay, most of the people who are listening to this work at corporations, would be most of them, and a good chunk of them are going to be in a finance role. So maybe just give some perspective then for all of us who are working inside corporations on how those sort of techniques can be used against us, because what are those folks trying to get? What type of information are they trying to get about the companies we work for in order to help themselves? You know what I mean? Like, how are those techniques basically being used against us at all the different corporations that we all work at?
Okay, well, I think we haven't mentioned the term, but I think a big part of this is elicitation. And elicitation is a skill, one of the first skills that we learn as intelligence officers, and it's our bread and butter when it comes to spotting, assessing, developing an individual. Really getting to know a lot about them without them feeling like, with one thing, there's different ways to extract information, right? And probably the most extreme and one that people try to use is interrogation, right? But that doesn't really work that well because they might just give you whatever they think you want to hear and not necessarily the truth. I mean, they know, and they don't want to cooperate with this individual. But then there's the second level interview where the individual knows who that person is that's interviewing them. Maybe it's somebody from HR or from security, and they can decide how cooperative they want to be. They know the question, these are direct questions that are asked. Elicitation is very different because the person that is being targeted and who is the subject of elicitation, this appears just to be a normal conversation with somebody, and the elicitor, in the case of the intelligence officer, is moving that conversation along. Usually we plan this in advance. It's almost like a whiteboard. These are the different bits and pieces of information we want to get about this individual, or we want to get about their position in the company or their access. So let's say that, we're going to have lunch with them. Maybe it's going to be an hour and a half lunch, and we will write down a whole list, maybe of 6 or 8 things that we would like to, depending on how the conversation goes, we would like to get to that information. And we find different ways to get there. And a lot of times it's not asking a direct question. To the contrary, it's like making a comment about something and then eliciting what how their feelings about something. So it can be anywhere from, there's like 11 different elicitation techniques. And one of the most basic ones that I think it's, and these are things I think it's really important for people to understand what are things that can be used against them, in elicitation, and what are elicitation is not necessarily a bad thing, right? There's different things that managers and people that even if they want to learn more about, their coworkers, or if a manager wants to learn something about their employee, instead of making it look like, an interrogation, they can use elicitation to learn about, how their employees are feeling about different things and how their life is going on. Sales people use it all the time also to size people up as customers. So elicitation is neither good nor bad. It's just a tool of being able to get people to talk, right, about things that are of interest to the listener. So one of the big ones is open-ended questions. Instead of asking a question that's going to elicit a yes or no, you're asking a question where the person is going to maybe go on for a period of time and giving a greater explanation. So, using flattery, using, you know, one that I like to use is also like my friend John. You're making a comment about somebody, someone, a cousin or a friend of you told you about something that's going on in their company. This is what's going on there. Does that happen in your company as well? A lot of times give to get, especially if you're leading somebody for the first time. Some people get turned off right away if you get someone that seems like they're asking question after question. Some of these questions might be kind of personal. You're making comments about your own family, right? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to getting back, man. I've been gone for 2 weeks and I missed my son's soccer game and my daughter's, piano recital and da da da. Yeah, do you have kids? And that person feels, oh yeah, I can talk about my kids, and it's so easy to open up and get people to talk about these things. Or you criticize something. Maybe you criticize somebody, the president, or you criticize right now, in Canada, go up, start criticizing Trump or whatever. This is an example, right? And see how does that person defend
Yeah.
Trump? Or does that person, yeah, agree? So it's kind of like you're putting different things in there, or making a comment about something you saw on the news, and you're getting that person's reaction to it. So there's a lot of different techniques. There's 11 that are really amongst the best, and you acquire this information. So it's kind of like having that understanding that those can be used against you. Normally, a person that's not trained in elicitation doesn't realize, and they just feel like, oh man, this was such a great conversation. I can't wait until I have a chance to continue it. That's what they walk away with. Seriously. So it's really important that they sort of understand that the type of information that might be extracted from you. And I think a lot of it goes back, the way to prevent that is in organizations. Do they have a clear-cut policy on what's considered sensitive information, proprietary information? Are their employees signing a non-disclosure agreement? Is that periodically brought up? I mean, sometimes people lose sensitivity toward whether the information is, they need to be really stewards of safeguarding the information.
Well, and just on that point, Peter, what would you define as sensitive information? Like for all of us working at, again, I read your book and it's really interesting. They're looking at the website. The folks who are looking to gather are going to go through every piece of information that is publicly available or that they can elicit from others. What type of information are they really trying to gather? You actually walk through a couple of examples in your book about how it's being used to, like one competitor goes after another competitor to try and sabotage them or something along those lines. We might think, well, that's fiction. No one would ever do that. Well, you're probably here to tell us that's not fiction at all. This happens every day, but maybe just give us some perspective on how you would define, private information and what information would then someone be looking for and how would they use it against us?
Well, okay, there's a lot of different ways, of course. There's when we're dealing with somebody, we want to find out information about them as well as information about the company they work for, because the more information we learn about them, I've always felt that the more information we reveal about ourselves, the more vulnerable we are, right? So in my own life, I've been always so cautious about kind of information that I share. And I just find out, especially, and this is cultural, I found out that especially in America, probably in Canada as well, but America, people are just so open, revealing there's, everything about them. And, if someone wants to use that, they're making it just so easy to be able to turn that and use that type of information. But regarding the organization, it's learning a lot about their policies, procedures that they have in place, the technology that they're using, because as a social engineer, human hacker, we're going to look for ways to circumvent, companies' policies, procedures, technological controls to breach into that organization, right? These is, whether it's an intelligence service, whether it's a criminal, whether it's an industrial competitor, whether, any sort of threat actor, there's a variety of them. They're going to be looking to circumvent that, and they're going to be using humans to do this. So we can learn from humans a lot of these things that maybe be very difficult for us to learn about just by doing searches on Google, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there in Google that we can, if we know how to do the searches correctly, we can find this information. But some of these individuals are the ones that can really reveal things that we have no other way to learn about. we suspect that we know there's information that could be really, really valuable from the standpoint of IP, but where is that information held? We try to learn about where is that held, who might have access to that. Um, I think, there was the example, the first opening example in that book where my book, where this individual is actually flying into Brazil, for example, and uses a lot of different techniques to try to ultimately get to an individual within that company that has access to a specific program, who can provide information regarding, everything in that program, as well as, put in some malicious code that will sabotage this company. But to first get to that individual, there's a number of different things that he has to do before he even identifies who that individual is, right? So he finds a way to collect information regarding that company. And one particular example is that the information that companies discard as trash, right? We do this as humans. I mean, our trash that we throw out as humans is incredibly insightful. We can go through someone's garbage. I can learn everything about them. And companies as well. I mean, so some companies have policies of, shredding their trash, but other ones don't. Or they may put their trash in place else where it can be accessible. I'll tell you, this is an example of a real case when I worked as a CIA officer, but just to give you an example, because I tell you, there's things that we want to learn about an individual, right? Or what are their vulnerability and motivations. This particular individual, he worked for a major organization in the country where I was. I can't say the name of the organization, but he was working there, but he was a foreigner. So he kind of he looked down upon the locals. He didn't like his management. He was there just basically getting a salary, right? But he kind of it's sort of we call this motivation of being sort of hate or revenge. You just you despise them. If you can do something kind of like up yours, kind of. So what he did is he would go around and collect documents out of the trash can. Because a lot of people, maybe they were preparing, reports or presentations for management. They got maybe something wrong with the font or something wrong, and they just throw it away and they print out another document. The document, maybe 95% of the document was perfectly fine from the standpoint of the information it had. Or he would even go and steal documents off of other people's desks. And he would come for a once a month meeting. And, I would check into a hotel in Alias, and then he would call at noon, let's say, and give him the hotel number. He'd come up to the hotel, my room, and come in with this big, maybe manila envelope, about 5 pounds worth of documents. Give me the envelope. He wouldn't be able to discuss the documents because a lot of these things he didn't even know, he couldn't explain them. But we had analysts that knew all these things. I could, I could pretty much understand these documents, and there's other people that, analysts that could look deeper if they wanted to. And we just spent the hour and a half just talking about lots of other things. But he was, he was doing that. It was basically providing documents that he got from the trash or from their desks and bringing it in that was really, really valuable to us, But we wouldn't have gotten there unless we found that this person had basically something that, he liked the money. He didn't feel any loyalty to the company that he was working for. He had the access. And he was also, he wanted to kind of get back at him. So there's a lot of different, during this process, when we deal with people, we can collect information regarding the company, or we can also collect information on this person that we can use later on to try to develop them as maybe an ongoing resource for us. So it doesn't mean that a threat actor is only just doing a one-time collection on an individual. He might actually try to recruit that individual to work for them during a longer period of time. So that's why we're using that information that might motivate somebody, or what may be a vulnerability that we can then come back and kind of pitch them, right? So that's why these are all the different types of things that we would want to learn about a company before we actually make that, whether it's recruiting somebody to go in, or whether we find some other ways that we can penetrate that company. There's also, I think, an example that I shared in the book, or I do have a video online. It's really cool. It's basically using social engineering. Once sort of kind of what the company looks like, what's the area around where the company is, sending somebody in who's pretending to make a delivery. That what the policy and procedure is getting into that company. First of all, if someone comes they would not be allowed past the reception until the receptionist calls somebody, and somebody will send down somebody. You know, many times in advance, they have to ask for authorization to bring this person into a company. That person has to be escorted. So we learn about the policies, right? Now we got to think about how we're going to circumvent those policies. And so we use the human hacking technique. We have someone go in, because we learned also in this process of who is a senior official within the company, and when is her anniversary, and she's married. And so we use the ploy of sending somebody in, delivering flowers to her that are sent by her husband. It's a surprise, right? He tells the receptionist, "This is a surprise. I got to deliver these flowers to her." And her anniversary, is really that date. So it's nothing that's made up. This is like all studied research. Her birthday, everybody knows I'm sorry, her anniversary is that date. And so he tells the receptionist this, and I got to personally deliver these, and I got to sing this tune, and it's so romantic. So you're getting these people to make an exception to the policy, make an exception to the rules. No worries, he even says, "Hey, I can leave my driver's license here if you need to." No, just go up, And she's like, "Oh, this is really cool." And so he goes up into the elevator, and he's not escorted. And instead of going and delivering those flowers, he is leaving out USB drives, thumb drives,
Wow.
marked confidential payroll. And most people, if they see a thumb drive, they totally discard it, or they'll turn it into security or whatever. But the confidential payroll, it's sort of like, enticing that human curiosity. What are people making in this company compared to me? So they'll insert that thumb drive into the computer at work. And while they're doing that, it uploads malware, and that's just one example of many things that you can do if you get unescorted access into a company. You can implant listening devices in the conference rooms. There's a number of things you could do if you're trying to get into a company, but you got to do that research in advance, right? You can't find all that stuff on open source research on online. You got to get that information from people, sort of
And
listen.
is people always the weakest link, Peter, at the end of the day?
Yes.
Like there's always going to be a human element that leads to, again, we'll make an exception. It's your anniversary.
Yeah. I mean, I decided to get into this work as far as trying to work with organizations and helping them understand, because when I found out, I retired, and I thought I was going to get far away from intelligence. I was retired, but hearing that, according to a report by IBM, this goes back a number of years, they were saying that over 90% of successful data breaches are initiated by some form of human hacking. Wow. I did this for a living,
Yeah.
So, and it's very true. We got to turn, the purpose here is trying to turn that weakest link into the strongest defense within a company. And that only happens by changing human behaviors. Okay. So a lot of that comes down to, with the awareness piece, and that's just, a great thing like you're doing today, creating that awareness for the people that are listening in about what are some of these things, how is this done? What are these vulnerabilities? What are some measures or best practices that I can incorporate to maybe change, whether it's my behavior or changing the behavior within the organization where we work, right? So that we can make it a stronger defense, because otherwise, we're always going to be, our lunch is going to be taken, unless we hide ourselves.
And what, one of the things that really surprised me about your books, Peter, is, I think we're all, or at least in my role, we get educated very much on the online attack. Don't click on this link. Don't click on any links. You know what I mean? But what I learned from your book is that's not really the preferred way to get into a company. The preferred way to get into a company is really an in-person attack. Is that is far more effective than trying to deal with things online, and therefore conferences and your interactions and things like that outside is something that, frankly, you probably have to be more concerned about than necessarily clicking on a malicious link. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a human hacker has much more control if they are dealing one-on-one with that individual. I mean, there's some advantages with doing things online, especially like using AI technology today, at least in the initial stages where you don't have to expose yourself to this target. You can try some different things. And if they don't work, you can then re-engineer your approach and approach them from some other angle, maybe using a new name, a different name, different pretext, whatever. You're kind of limited though how far you can take that. Once you develop that face-to-face connection with somebody, you have a lot more control. And I think I had this in the book as well, because this is a very effective technique. And I mean, I've used it. I used it. A lot of colleagues have used it in the intelligence community world. Industrial competitors use it. Criminals will use it. And it's using the sort of, we call it headhunter scheme. Okay. Because imagine a scenario, and because this is how it plays out. Somebody in your organization is called by someone who claims to be an executive recruiter. They're calling you because they're very impressed with your background that they've seen on LinkedIn, because a lot of people will have their profiles on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of the greatest ways to identify potential, they call them insider candidates, right? People that we can target to gain access to the companies. And LinkedIn is like a fantastic resource. And so the human hacker executive recruiter calls and says that, based on the profile, believe it'll be a good fit for one of the clients that they're trying to fill a position for. And that position, has a much more responsibility than what this individual has today. Higher title, and of course, with a higher title, greater compensation. So even if they weren't interested they hadn't been pursuing other opportunities, what do they have to lose by, going on and have a conversation with this person? Could be interesting, right? So we get them outside of the office for, a coffee or lunch, a good solid hour plus, and using a variety, of interview questions, like a typical interview question, which you can ask a lot of direct questions, but combining that then with elicitation techniques. So you're in the process of building that rapport with that person and getting a tremendous amount of information on them, as well as the company that they're working for. And they might be a little bit guarded regarding the amount of how sensitive the information that they're providing, but you can still get a lot of information. And even out, reaching out to somebody who maybe is not with that company now, but it's a former employer. That might be also a means to getting information about that company, because, that person feels less now of an obligation to kind of protect it. So it might be a one-time collection effort. Or it could be maybe they have multiple another meeting or 3 meetings just to continue to get more information. Or the scenario that works the best and how this can go on is that, eventually they get together a second time or third time. I'm sorry, that opportunity, somebody else got that job. Okay, but I have this other one, and then unfortunately later on that, they didn't get that job. And that could go on for 2 or 3 different times. And now the person is like, wow, their bubble, their ego is kind of burst. I didn't know it'd be that difficult. They thought they were a great candidate, and here, they haven't gotten an offer. But then now the human hacker goes back, because they've gone back to probably a question they asked them during the very first meeting. Have you ever thought about being an independent consultant in your industry? They probably said, yeah, I thought about that, or that would be kind of something that I would be interested in someday. And then, time has passed. You told me during that meeting we had initially that someday you would be interested in being an independent consultant. I think I found a perfect opportunity for you. I have a client right now that's really interested in learning much more about this industry, and what's going on in the industry. Who are the players? Because that's something that they want to get more into. And you could stay in your current position, earning your salary, earning your benefits, and at the same time work as a consultant. You don't have to report the income, get paid in cash. And we sign a non-disclosure agreement, and no one else is going to know about this. And so most of the times they will say, sure, they'll do it. And little by little, more sensitive questions are being asked about the employer, the company where they work, and in exchange for higher and higher compensation, performance bonuses. And they become accustomed. They become accustomed to sharing that information, and they become accustomed to the money that they're receiving. And so this is not just going on for a few months. This can go on for years. Yeah. And this does not appear as a normal data breach. I'm sorry, CISOs, because sometimes CISOs think, well, I know what's going on in the networks. I can find what's going on in these networks. but this does not necessarily show up as a normal data breach. And companies can basically, hemorrhage information without the employer, without them ever discovering it. Eventually, maybe there's no more interest in the information, or that person has lost their access, or they've moved on to another position, or they retired, and they sign once again remind each other non-disclosure agreement, and here's a termination bonus. Hopefully someday we might be able to rekindle this if things change, and everybody's happy. And these things are going on, in the shadows, and people are just not aware that's going on. So that's one great way to reach out to somebody that's been identified. But these other ways also, as mentioned in my book, and as you alluded to, conferences. These are one of the greatest places for us to go out there and meet people. Whether you're representing, a company, a business interest, or you're representing somebody from the university, or you're representing somebody from the government, you're out there, and people are your guard is down. They're much more relaxed when they're going to these conferences to talk to people, to network, and you can easily have a conversation with them. If I seize onto somebody that, a lot of times we know that even now, today, we know in advance who is going because they put it on their social media. I'm heading to Houston for whatever, we know they're going to be there. Or if not, they're at least got their name tag, their name, their title, and the company. So we can kind of troll. And then if I find someone that said, this person could really be an interesting target, I know when lunch is going to be taking place. And you're kind of like, hovering in the area where this guy or gal is sitting down, and you sit down right next to them. You got 45 minutes of uninterrupted time to really chat with them. So there's a lot of these trade shows, these conferences. Sometimes there's people that might be of interest to us, or our speakers at conferences. So whether we go there and listen to them, and then approach them at that moment, or we contact them later. Hey, I heard your presentation, or I wasn't able to go, but I'm fascinated by by the work that you do. You're flattering them, and you're also your people love to be mentors to you. So if you ask them to explain something to you, there's a lot of these different ways that you get people to kind of like engage and speak with you and share information about themselves and about their work.
So you take LinkedIn. We all have a LinkedIn profile, including Peter Warmka. Peter Warmka has a LinkedIn profile as well. What's the best practices for how to protect ourselves then, on not just LinkedIn, but all social media platforms? Like, is there kind of one or two rules that you would say, look, these are like the core things that you really need to stick to protect yourself? Because
Yeah.
I don't think the answer is to not have one. I don't think that's to go the extreme. You probably have to have some presence, but presumably there's a way to do it in the right way that you're not going to allow yourself to be taken advantage of.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And let me kind of, for your listeners, expand why that's so important. Today, LinkedIn, there's over 1 billion LinkedIn profiles. There's estimated that 15% of them are fake, 150 million fake profiles. So now you're saying, like, what? Why? Because those fake profiles are being used for a number of reasons. There might be some that are used by law enforcement, things like that, but the vast majority of them are being used for malicious. They're being used to target people, whether it's trying to target people for pig butchering scams, trying to get them to invest in cryptocurrency, or maybe it's the intelligence service that's trying to reach out to somebody, or somebody that's trying to send in think about, people are concerned about phishing, right? It's malicious, a link, a malicious attachment, but those can be sent via text messages as well. Those can be sent via DMs in LinkedIn. You start a conversation with somebody, they can easily put in that malicious link or malicious attachment. People will tend to trust that more than an email that has no picture, right? They think they're connecting with that person that they see in that picture, and those profiles are so easily can be created. I even create some for educational purposes, and you can set one up and have 500 legitimate connections in about 10 days. You can have
Wow.
thousands of followers in a matter of a few months. You can have people endorse you, and you don't even exist, but people will endorse you. It's amazing what you can do with these things. So, the important thing if you become a target, a profile can be made intentionally to target you, having commonalities with you, the same certification, same university you went to, I don't know, something that kind of draws you to that person. Oh, we got something in common. So it's kind of like, it creates that sort of feeling of that bond, where you're more likely to accept. There are people that will accept every single LinkedIn connection request they get because they think, why not? I'm going to build up my community. Bum, bum, bum. Um, Without even looking at the profile, they will accept it. And so I say the best thing is not to accept connections of people you don't know. However, I realize that for a lot of people that's not necessarily, they don't want to limit themselves to that because they're trying to grow their, and I understand that. I do the same thing, but I think what's important is before you click on that acceptance, take a look at that profile. See and kind of do your due diligence on that profile. Does it make sense? Kind of like read it as if you were looking at that and making a hiring decision about whether or not you might consider hiring this person or bringing them in for an interview. Are there any significant gaps or things that don't make sense? Right.
Yep.
And I think prior to AI, prior to ChatGPT, that was very easy to pull out some of these ones that were fraudulent. Maybe they were very weak, there was grammatical errors, or they were cutting and pasting from other profiles, you know. But now with ChatGPT, they can create that perfect text. So you can't necessarily go specifically just on reading. And if it looks good, say that it could still be fabricated by fraudsters using these type of tools. And but you still want to take a look at as much as you can, making a decision of this person look legitimate based on the progression of their academic and the progression of their professional, the jobs that they've had. And then what's really important is if they never contact you, fine. If they contact you, this is where you have to be really on guard. Why are they contacting? What's the ask? Are they asking you for information that maybe could be sensitive? Are they asking you to open up an attachment or or a link? That's when you got to say, well, I clicked to this, this is not a person that I personally know. Why now is this person reaching out to me and asking these things? That's when I would think you really want to be careful in any of these things. You could set up your social media accounts, but when people are approaching you, the human hackers are ones that have researched you. They can use any sort of pretext they want to approach you. And it's then our job to ensure that we try to verify legitimacy of this request before going on and trying to respond, and comply with whatever the request is for information or because that's where potentially that we have that risk. So
Absolutely.
these different types of platforms I think are all fine as far as using them, but there's so much, you got to be so aware that there's so many fake profiles, whether it's just LinkedIn, it's also Facebook, Instagram. There are a lot of fake profiles. I mean, you just got to be cautious, very, very cautious about how we interact with people that we don't personally know.
The other thing that we've talked a lot about, companies gathering information, as we do this interview today, Russia and the Ukraine are at war and the world is kind of, up against Russia, obviously for what they've done. We're in the middle of a tariff battle with China. And one of the things you talk about is the amount of information that the Chinese have collected on, not just their own citizens, but citizens outside. And then, North Korea as well, obviously has their own issues. Give us some perspective on what goes inside of those countries in terms of how they're trying to gather information outside and how they could possibly use that information against us in the future.
Well, all these countries, I think, to a certain degree, are trying to collect this information, but the one that's the most spectacular, I would say, from a standpoint of the information collected to date that we're aware of, would be China. And this is all public information, but it didn't really get enough, I think, coverage in the press. And I think even the U.S. government needs to do a lot more about this and making it well known and trying to educate people as well as how can they protect themselves and the organizations that they work for because of this. There's a number of breaches that have been, conducted by the Chinese. The first one goes back to, I think it was in 2014 or 13, the Anthem. Anthem is a big healthcare provider, and over 70 million records were through the breach of Anthem were actually compromised. And so that's probably the most sensitive information that people have, much more than, even more than their financial records, right? Is their health records. So that information was hacked, and it was confirmed by the U.S. government that it was Chinese. Then another one that's probably the most damaging, and one that I'm personally, victimized, is the Office of Personnel, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. Office of Personnel Management is think of it as the organization that uh, that safeguards. I was going to say safeguards. That basically retains all this information by people that have been issued security clearances. Right? There's over 20, I think, over 20 million people that had their information compromised by the Chinese, because the Chinese, in two different attacks, 2013 and 2014, were able to get at the records of OPM, and it was later confirmed by the U.S. government that it was the Chinese. And the information, think about, this is the information that's collected by the U.S. government to make an assessment, risk, being able to adjudicate the risk about whether or not this person can be issued a security clearance. Is the risk acceptable? So they collect everything on you. This is not just BII information. This is
Yes.
everything you can imagine about you and your family members. And think about all your credit history. Think about all your health history. Think about, just imagine everything that's possible. Even things that your significant other doesn't know about you that you wouldn't want them to know. Okay, can you imagine? That stuff
Yeah.
all is pretty much, it's going to come out and it's being held in these records. So when I got I got a letter from OPM. My wife got one as well, and they go all down all the categories of information that potentially compromise about your background, to include your fingerprints. Okay, so the Chinese got that. Then Equifax was breached. Over 160 million, mostly Americans, had their credit information breached through that hack. Chinese. Then the fourth one, more recently, was Marriott International. Now, so what is unique about Marriott International? Well, one of the things would be your travel history and your travel documents, your passport numbers, and things like that, right? Because people will probably go to the same hotel chain or whatever to use rewards, right? So they had a lot of information on these individuals, and once again, that was the Chinese. These are four significant ones that we are aware of that were hacked by the Chinese, and there's probably others, but these are the ones that we are aware of and have been confirmed by the U.S. government. So, okay, good and well. So what do we know about this information? Well, probably another confirmation is that the information was not found on the dark web, because if usually it's a criminal group, that information is on the dark web real quick, and people will buy it, right? Criminals will buy it. This information did not find its way in the dark web, so it's almost like reconfirmation. Yeah, it's being held by the Chinese for some purpose. What purpose? We can only speculate, but thinking as an intelligence officer, former intelligence officer, what this would be invaluable information for targeting and assessing individuals of interest to pursue the thing. And it could be people that are working in specific defense contractors that may have to have security clearances, people that are working in certain circles within the U.S. government. And think about it, maybe all of a sudden there's interest in somebody who's an advisor, to a senior politician, a secretary of state, a secretary, or the president's inner circle. Just, it could be anything, right? Could be anything. And now they have this information on this individual. How can it be used? It could be used, especially exploiting those vulnerabilities, whether it's offering them a tremendously generous financial compensation, knowing that they have certain, they got the credit history as well. They got to know what their financial situation is like, or maybe trying to blackmail them, and they could be pursued as individuals, sources of intelligence to provide intelligence, or they could be pursued as agents of influence as well, to try to influence something that's going to be in the interest of the Chinese. So to me, it's a big concern. We have not yet, that I'm aware of, seen how this information is being utilized, if it has been yet, but undoubtedly undoubtedly it's going to be used for that, just as some measure. Now, other countries to a lesser scale, but think of China, think of North Korea. Biggest thing about North Korea is how they use intelligence for financial extortion. Okay, so they're like the largest entity behind ransomware attacks, and cryptocurrencies attacks, scams. So they're in the they will try to get information on people who could help facilitate maybe conducting that ransomware attack against the company. So they got different objectives, right? About how they want to use that intelligence. Ultimately, what's their end goal in the world, greater scheme of things. But all pretty much any intelligence service worth its weight is going to be trying to collect information on people. Some larger extent, smaller extent, depending on their resources and what their interests are.
And how do people protect themselves against that? Like, are we basically, an entity like Equifax or the U.S. government gets hacked? Like, what are we supposed to do about it? You know what I mean? Like, there's almost, we do trust the governments. That's probably a fundamental, aspect of society, is that there's a trust level in your government and these large corporations. What are we supposed to do as individuals? We can protect ourselves. Again, you suggested some great things on LinkedIn about, but when it comes to a company like Equifax or something like that being hacked, what are we supposed to do about it?
There's a couple of things here, and I want to hit trust in a few minutes, but I used to give, like, when my presentations, I used to harp on, you gotta be careful of the information you're putting out there, whether you're a company or an individual. You're putting on the information that's out there on the World Wide Web, especially on social media, because you're making yourself more vulnerable. But as you mentioned, so many of these breaches have happened now that pretty much everybody's PII information has been exposed multiple times. And I know my personally has been like I've been notified by 7 or 8 organizations that have had serious data breaches where my information has been, at least 7 or 8. So we have to presume that our information is available to threat actors. So that's a given. Now, what are we going to do about it? And we have to realize, once again, the threat is not so much when we are going out and reaching out to somebody that can turn into something really bad. The danger is coming in when they try to come and reach out to us. Think about, there's like 5 different communication channels that can be used by a threat actor today: email, text messaging, social media, DMs, a telephone, and face-to-face encounters. That threat actor can use whatever type of pretext that they want to use in reaching out to you, and they've done some initial assessment of you, and they kind of know what motivates or what vulnerabilities you have. They'll come up with what they think is going to really kind of like hook you in to what they're offering or what they want from you. And if for some reason it doesn't quite take, they already have thought through alternatives, plan A, plan B, plan C, because they're ready, right? So it's not the danger of us reaching out to somebody. It's when someone that we don't know reaches out to us. And if we blindly trust that they are who they say they are, this is where we run into that problem, that blind trust, because it's not that we got to be paranoid with everything, but we have to use our critical thinking skills, right? Is there an ask? This person's contacting us and there's an ask. Are they asking us for information that's considered kind of sensitive? Or are they asking us to undertake a specific action, such as making an urgent payment? Whether it's you at home, I can make this urgent payment on this card for whatever reason, or urgent wire transfer because I believe it's the boss that's telling me to do this, or am I going to be asked, urgently issue an access pass, which ultimately is going to a threat actor to gain access to a very significant, protected area of the company. What's the ask? And if there's an ask and it's considered, if that's fraudulent, it could be detrimental to you or the organization. That's when we got to step back and just hang on here. Don't get caught up with the emotions of fear or scarcity in a message that I got to. That's also a tool in the toolkit. Trying to do something that doesn't give you time to think. Trying to force you into making an emotional decision right away. But we got to push away from those emotions and think. And I'm going to have to find a way to verify this request before I go ahead and comply with whatever's being asked. So I say verify, then trust. It's not, you hear a lot about trust, but then verify, but not in this world. I reverse this. You have to trust. You have to verify before trust, because it's too late. Once you click on that link or give something out, it's too late. It's too late. You can't take it back. So, verify, then trust. Now the thing about trust is the following. we in America, probably Canada as well, and some other countries, if I was taught trust everybody until they give you a reason not to. And one of the first places I went to live overseas, there were circles of trust. You only trust people in your inner circle, your close family members, maybe friends that you grew up with since kindergarten, right? Anybody outside that circle, you don't trust at all. In fact, you're there for a game. If you want to take advantage of them, that's not part of your tribe, right? But you have people you trust, but here, people tend to trust everybody. So trust is cultural, and too often can be blind here, and we have to, instead of blindly trusting everything, we have to use our tempered trust. We got to know when we're going to be trusting somebody, and why we're going to trust. So I think that's key. It's kind of like being aware. People can approach us. They can already have our information. They can contact us with any kind of pretext. Now we analyze, what's being asked of us, and we need to verify before we comply with anything. Using that tempered trust and that critical thinking. If we do that, that will pretty much save us from 95% of any sort of human hacking that's being targeted against us. I really believe that can save almost 95% of the time.
Because would it be fair as well, Peter, that it's like the robber who walks into a neighborhood and says, which house am I going to rob? And he sees the ones with the little sign up that says protected by a home security system, right? And he says, you know what, like I'm not going to go after that, whether or not they even have a security system or not. They're probably just going to keep going until they find the one. Is it fair to say is that if you're approached and you at least start asking questions, that they'll just immediately move off to somebody else to say, look, like it's just not worth it to go and invest the time here because it's probably not going to end well, or it's just going to take too much time. They're just going to keep going on until they find that one link who is just going to, like you say, blindly trust them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best thing to say. I mean, if you feel like someone's trying to elicit information, use some counter elicitation techniques would be to say, sorry, I don't really know that. That information is available on our website. Or why are you asking? Like, turn that around. That could really put that person in an awkward situation when you say, why are you asking this? Right. So there's ways of getting out of that. You don't feel like you're obligated to positively respond to any sort of request by people that come out of, the blue trying to elicit information. You can shut it down. You can give them an alternative. That information, contact the company directly on the website.
The other question I want to ask you, Peter, is the interest of authorities in all of this stuff. Like it is an option to say call the police or call whoever. Like, is that actually helpful, or is the answer coming back from the authorities saying, look, like we're too busy investigating murders and these violent crimes. We don't have time for some blind request you received on whatever platform. So are we really there to protect ourselves, or can we look to authorities to help us?
I mean, sad to say this. I mean, I know that there's authorities that are very well intended, and I mean, if you try to call somebody and they might give you some advice, but a lot of times authorities are not even brought into these things until there's been some sort of violation, some sort of breach, right? And then people will contact the authorities thinking that the authorities are going to really help them resolve it, but the authorities are really overwhelmed. And some of these are so difficult. They have to prioritize, and usually the prioritization is probably based on what has been the largest detrimental impact, and probably monetary, right? I know if someone lost $10,000, that's not going to be the same if someone has lost a million, so they can't go and try to resolve all of these different. They get thousands of these requests a day. I mean, you're encouraged, if something happens, to go ahead and file a report. And be honest with you, a lot of those filings are used pretty much as gathering statistics about how much money has been stolen, or what has been the different techniques that maybe have been used. But reporting, it usually, unfortunately, it doesn't provide you with resolution, other than it can help, though. It can help others from maybe not falling into the same sort of some scams. And I really encourage people to share testimonies, whether it's companies sharing testimonies with other companies, individuals sharing testimonies, because a lot of people think, oh, it would never happen to me. It would never happen to me. People are very, what we call sort of, there's a term, like, never happened to me.
Yep.
I don't have to worry about it. And until it does. And security is never convenient, but less convenient is becoming a victim, right? So that's why it's good. I think we really need to share these testimonies. We can learn a lot about them and realize, heck, that happened to my neighbor down the street. Yeah. Every day I'm coming. I got neighbors that come over to me and crying, just the stress about how they lost all this money through these different scams, and I try to help them, but it's just like most people believe that it won't happen, but then it does, unfortunately.
No, one common example up here is we have a big auto theft problem where, cars are being stolen left, right, and center,
Yeah.
and up and down the street. And, it's just a matter of time. But again, is there certain things you can do to protect yourself from that happening? Absolutely, there is.
Yeah.
Of parking your car in your garage and a bunch of different things that you can do. And if you want a full list of everything, just pick up Peter's book, because you pretty much outlined every possible scam from, construction workers to, you had raised a great example in your book where there was a salesperson who showed up at your house trying to sell you some protection plan, and then you stormed into their office. I'm not sure if necessarily that was a scam, but this certainly was, again, somebody who was trying to, get money from you. You know what I mean? And who knows if it was actually 100% legit or not. But end of the day, they honored your request, Peter. And they canceled your contract within the 24 hours or 48 hours, whatever the period was. So
I like using what do you call props, right? And I'm a certified fraud examiner, and I have a nice black jacket that has the big emblem of the certified
yeah,
fraud
exactly.
examiner. So I walked into there, and I said, I insisted on seeing the manager, and as soon as I walked in there, I just said, "There's something that doesn't seem transparent in this transaction." That it didn't take long to reverse that. Yeah. There's a lot of things that we can do, and it's at the very top of the list, though. Awareness is the first step. If we don't have that awareness,
100%.
so every chance that people got to try to listen to this type of podcasts, read up as much as possible, and educate other family, friends, and there's things that we can do, and always verify. Verify whether it's happening in a company, or we've had these incidences of more and more AI being used now in targeting individuals, especially voice cloning.
Yep.
And if we hear that voice, people are still sure that it's how can it not be that person?
Yeah.
And so there's ways, set up that code, set up that passphrase that can be used in emergency situations, even in your family. If someone calls a family member and they have this terrible emergency, but they don't use that pre-agreed code or phrase, then it's a scam. I mean, it's not that hard to really combat this thing. It just
Yeah.
takes that awareness and changing a little bit of people's behavior.
So as we wrap up here, Peter, thanks. This is a very, very interesting conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. Anything you want to leave us with? I know you do a lot of work. You founded the Counterintelligence Institute. Again, I would highly recommend people take a read of your books. How do people get in touch with you, and maybe just give some perspective on what's keeping you busy today? Because this issue isn't going away.
Sure. The best way to reach out to me is going to the Institute website, counterintelligence-institute.com. I'm also a very active profile on LinkedIn, and also on LinkedIn, as well as the Institute's website. There's a lot of interesting videos there, and the books are available on Amazon. And I just came back from a conference. Just came back from Seattle yesterday. I gave a presentation out there to a group of certified fraud examiners, and I travel quite a bit to speak to different audiences. And whether it's a keynote presentation or a 1 or 2 day workshop, I'm available for these types of things. So if you think something like this could be benefit for your organization, or maybe some groups that associations that you're members of, and you would think that could be interesting for them, whether it's in person or virtually, if that's a possibility. And so I'm involved in that. I even travel overseas. I've done work in Brazil, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, and give presentations in Spanish and in Portuguese as well. So there's a whole mixture. So if there's anything that you think could be my message that could be of interest for you or for people that you work with, please reach out to me, because consider me a resource that might be able to help.
You absolutely can help. There's no doubt about that. So, Peter, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're super busy. We really appreciate you taking the time. And again, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Scott. You have a great day. Hope to meet you. Hope to meet you in person eventually.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Take care.
Well, that wraps another episode of CSI Chat, and I really wanted to thank everybody for listening. If you want to keep up to date on CSI Chat, I would encourage everyone to join our CSI Chat LinkedIn group and or follow us on Twitter/X under CSI Chat. With that, I will get you out of here on a high note with some music, and thanks again.
Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our host an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers meet the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. CSI Chat, where the numbers meet the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with a clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic set us free. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with a clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic set us free. CSI Chat is the podcast you'll adore. With our accountant host, you'll always want more. So grab your headphones and join the fun on CSI Chat, where the mystery's never done. We'll see the case through.